For the inaugural session on the Indian era, we're honored to welcome Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman, Finance Minister of India, along with Professor Jagdish Bhagwati, Professor of Economics and Law, Columbia University. The chair for this session, Mr. N.K.Singh, will begin the proceedings. May I request Mr. Singh, an Honorable Minister, to join us on the dais. Mr. Singh, I request you to begin the proceedings.
Good morning, all of you. A very warm welcome to the Honorable Finance Minister for having graciously agreed to inaugurate this conference, indeed her own conference, because the idea of a Kautilya economic conclave, I recall, was conceived in a discussion in your room, and your generous support has enabled us to now reach the third edition. Even in the last two editions, we have sought to diversify both the country reach, the quality of people, which has improved with each endeavor of ours. So we present to you, Honorable Finance Minister, roughly 50 international delegates with an equivalent number of Indian delegates who have domain understanding and skills on a wide variety of development issues. Over the next 2.5 days, Minister, we will be discussing a complex set of issues, the challenges of development economics, the political economy of change in multiple ways, the sort of challenges which we confront today, the challenges of how to sustain high rates of economic growth in the context of growing global uncertainties, with the geopolitics, geoeconomics, the difficult choices which have to be made to escape what economists popularly condemn a middle-income trap, the presence of many of these domain economists who are, Finance Minister, in multiple ways done enormous work and research in this, will assure you that the discussions over the next 2.5 days are likely to be meaningful in searching solutions which are critical. We assure you, Finance Minister, that as it was always said, it is not the number of people in the room which matter. What matters is, are they the right people? We are confident, Finance Minister, that those whom you will address today are the right people who are willing to listen to us, and that we assure them equally we are willing to listen to them. Finance Minister, before I end, let me say that you have made some of the more difficult decisions on India's economic reform trajectory. I know that during the pandemic, no other country would, instead of choosing a path of continued fiscal profligacy, chose instead to ensure that technology was effectively used to be able to deliver multiplicity of benefits to people adversely affected on account of the pandemic, to redress poverty, to ensure food security, and the quality of the governance-led incentives were enhanced and in no way interfered by the interruptions caused by the pandemic. Instead, if I may recall, Finance Minister, and people who have traveled all over must know that you addressed a challenge, that the pandemic is a challenge, but every challenge is also an opportunity. What was that opportunity? The widest set of economic reforms were unraveled during this challenging period, and the unraveling of those reforms touched on some complex, difficult subjects, in some ways touched, which were regarded as untouchable earlier. The issues of shrinking the role of public enterprises and the public sector, allowing private capital, private enterprise, and innovation to inform the policy framework of the Indian economy, combining the challenges of the pandemic with the continued economic reform momentum has really ensured that we are among the few countries which for 4 years successively now have been able to achieve high rates of economic growth, 7% plus, a credible structural reform initiative with efforts to try and ensure that the growth process is as inclusive as possible, employment enhancing as possible, using the best efforts to combine the values of the cutting edge of technology while ensuring that employment is also increased. All these complex issues, Finance Minister, are what we will seek to address in the course of the next 2.5 days. Before I end, may I also welcome Professor Jagdish Bhagwati, who, notwithstanding all the difficulties of a long travel and some of the other handicaps, has endeavored to join us today on this inaugural session. Professor Bhagwati, to any literate audience all over the world, requires no introduction, not only because of his intellectual prowess, far-reaching changes which he brought about and his writing sought to brought about, but the perseverance with the beliefs which he had that in the end, global good must come from a freer world, from a world which has less handicaps, and the power of recognizing that the engine of growth and to sustain rates of economic growth will be greatly enhanced if trade was an enabler and trade was not a handicap. To hold these views at a time when even much before all these protectionist influences began, but to hold the flag for a freer world, for global good, was only Jagdish held out in his writings, analysis, and the policy contributions which he made. You will see that when we are able to engage Jagdish, that Jagdish is quintessentially remains an innovator with a mind which is brilliant at every turn of events. So Jagdish, thank you very much for this endeavor, for joining us today at this inaugural session of the third Kautilya Economic Conclave. With these words, may I request you, Honorable Finance Minister, to kindly deliver your inaugural address. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you very much, N.K.Singh, for giving that very elaborate introduction. I'm indeed very grateful to Professor Jagdish Bhagwati for having come here to join in the third edition of Kautilya Conclave. And before me, I see a select August gathering. Finance Minister, no doubt, but it just makes me a bit nervous to have to talk before this rich audience. And it is your views that I look forward to at the end of this conference to guide me further in taking India's economy in all its divergence and also the challenges, the newer challenges which are coming before us, literally by the day. and make sure that India continues to be the fastest growing economy. So thank you very much for coming here. I begin with a thanks, but I really do mean, because I feel very humbled to stand on the dais along with Professor Bhagwati and to be able to address. It requires a different kind of courage, but I take the challenge. Let me at the outset thank and congratulate N.K.Singh, President of the Indian Institute of Economic Growth, and Dr. Chetan Ghate, Director of the Institute of Economic Growth, for organizing this third edition of the Kautilya Economic Conclave, which begins today, and that brings together a galaxy of renowned scholars from around the world. This conclave provides an opportunity for the exchange of latest research and ideas on a host of issues that are engaging the attention of governments globally. Why the India story will provide a unique opportunity for thinking about policy. And it is that which I would want to expand on a bit. India's creditable economic performance in the recent decade was underscored by its leapfrog from the 10th to the 5th largest economy in a matter of 5 years. Sustained high growth rates and maintain inflation well within the comfortable range was the challenge before us, and we are performing to our best of abilities. While it took us 75 years to reach a per capita income of $2,730 as per IMF projections, it will take only 5 years to add another $2,000. The upcoming decades will see the steepest rise in living standards for the common man, truly making it a period-defining era for an Indian to live in. This is being achieved with declining inequality, as the Gini coefficient for rural India's numbers declined from 0.283 to 0.266. And for the urban areas, it declined from 0.363 to 0.314. I expect these improvements to continue as the effects of the last 10 years of economic and structural reforms manifest more thoroughly in the data in the coming years as the COVID shock fades away from the economy. The Kautilya Economic Conclave has become a congregation and a congregation event for policy experts in economics and finance. As India strives towards Vikasit Bharat, we require thought leaders and experts such as yourselves to guide policy making. From a policy standpoint, India's economic rise in the coming decades will be unique in a few ways. First, while India will continue to grow over the decade, the global backdrop is no longer the same. In the early 2000s, emerging markets like China grew relatively more easily due to a favorable global trade and investment climate. This poses a potential challenge and an opportunity for India, while simultaneously pushing for the diplomacy and cooperation, as we did during our G20 presidency. India must develop its domestic capacity to grow and develop sustainably. Second, India seeks to double its per capita income in a matter of few years for its 1.4 billion population, which makes up about 18% of the global total. In a fragmented and fractured world, where several persistent conflicts may worsen, posing a threat to global peace that is the bedrock for prosperity. Third, the development journey will have to contend with the twin challenges of dealing with the legacy emissions of the developed world and managing India's energy transition. The balancing act requires a whole-of-government approach and contextualized solutions unique to India. Moreover, India's energy demand and energy use practices have something to offer to the world, such as the food-to-feed balance. Lastly, the advent of new technologies may leave a more lasting impact on labor, including workers that people gathered here and outside have to reflect upon. The forces that will shape the Indian era. From a domestic perspective, India's youthful population provides a large base for total factor productivity improvements, savings, and investment. While India's share of the young is set to rise over the next 2 decades, several other developing economies are past their demographic peak. A nation's greatest asset during its high growth years is a young population. India needs to ensure that they are cognitively equipped, emotionally strong, and physically fit. That is our core policy priority. Second, consumption will organically rise over the coming decade. As of now, 43% of Indians are younger than 24 years of age, and they have yet to explore their consumption behavior fully. There will be organic growth in consumption as they become full-fledged consumers. Simultaneously, a rising middle class will pave the way for strong consumption, inflow of foreign investment, and a vibrant marketplace. Third, India's innovation ability will mature and improve over the coming decades. As the Global Innovation Index for 2023 shows, India has been performing above the average in innovation for its income groups. There is a gradual maturing of innovation potential across sectors. We observe, for instance, a maturing of India's services sector exports and a rise in innovative potential within this sector. The global capability centers boom that we have seen today has put India squarely at the center of innovation. With nearly 56% of GCC's revenue coming from R&D services. Similarly, our low-cost scalable innovation is evident in India's stack, low-cost vaccines, and a much-celebrated Chandrayaan mission. Fourth, our financial system is well capitalized to fuel productive credit. India's financial market has evolved into a competitive system whose crisis management, regulatory management, and governance standards are at par with those of developed financial markets. At the same time, the Indian financial system has remained nimble to the growing needs of a developing India as it widened its scale and scope of financial inclusion. There has also been a sharp narrowing in the gaps in financial access, that is between rich and the poor, male and female, rural and urban, over the past decade. Fifth, India also finds itself amidst the global geopolitical repositioning effort which is going on. This repositioning can act as a structural force to India's advantage by creating robust supply chains with countries with strategic congruence. India benefits from the new international order, which is reshaping better to reflect the power distribution of today's world. The fiscal tools and policies to establish an era of growth. I'll spend a minute on it. The role of the government lies in unleashing the structural drivers of growth using effective governance through Jan Bhagidari. With sound economic policies and strategic planning forming the cornerstone of the growth process. I outlined some key areas of the government's focus that continue laying the groundwork for Vikasit Bharat. Our government continues to uphold its commitment to reducing the fiscal deficit. Aided by buoyant revenue generation, restrained revenue expenditure growth, and healthy economic activity, the fiscal deficit is estimated to decline further from 5.6% of GDP in FY24, I'm basing on provisional actuals, to 4.9% in FY25. The commitment to fiscal discipline will not only help keep bond yields in check, but will translate to lower economy-wide borrowing costs. The quality of government expenditure continues to improve. Capital expenditure is budgeted to increase by 17.1% to 11.1 lakh crores this fiscal. This amounts to 3.4% of GDP in FY25. Additionally, a larger proportion of fiscal deficit is now accounted for by capital outlays, indicating an increasingly investment-oriented deficit financing. The decline in commodity prices has facilitated the lowering of the budget allocation for subsidies on fertilizer and fuel. This has contributed to restraining the growth in revenue expenditure, which is estimated to increase by 6.2% year-on-year. To ensure policy continuity, the bedrock of sustained growth, our government has initiated and sustained reforms across infrastructure, banking, trade policy, investment, and ease of doing business. Infrastructure reforms over the past decade have expanded the national highways, increasing by 1.6 times from 2014 to 2024. The Bharatmala Pariyojana has significantly expanded the national highway network, increasing the length of high-speed corridors by 12 times and 4-lane roads by 2.6 times in the 10 years between 2014 and 24. Today, 11.7 kilometers of national highway roads are laid on an average per day, which is 3 times more than what was the case before FY14. India's ports have also made remarkable strides over the past decade and are now at par or even better and above international players. The economic survey this year reported that port turnaround time has dropped by 50% between 2014 and 24. Currently, the median turnaround time for Indian ports is at 0.9 days, better than the US's 1.5 days, Australia's 1.7 days, and Singapore's 1 day. Such substantial advancements in logistics efficiency are reflected in India's sharp ascent in the World Bank's Logistics Performance Index from 54 in 2014 and 44 in 2018 to 38 in 2023. The soundness and resilience of India's banking sector have been underpinned by sustained policy focus on asset quality improvements, enhanced provisioning for bad loans, sustained capital adequacy, and a rise in profitability. NPA ratios are at a multi-year low, and banks have now efficient debt recovery mechanisms, ensuring that the financial system stays healthy and the cycle lasts longer is another of our core policy priorities. Trade policy reform has focused on trade facilitation and integrating deeper with nations close geopolitically to us, and in this we are in line with the Foreign Trade Policy 2023. Exporters today find it easier to facilitate their trade compared to a decade ago. This is evident from India's achievement of 93.5% in 2023 in the UN Global Survey on trade facilitation. In addition, a deep free trade agreement or several deep free trade agreements with partners such as UAE, Australia, and the EFTA region, a clustered approach to developing export hubs is also being pursued through schemes such as Make in India and districts as export hubs. Investment reform and ease of doing business are central to this government's policy of minimum government and maximum governance. The government has pursued a multi-pronged policy of regulation to reduce investment costs and improve efficiency. We have pursued the deregulation and simplification of labor codes, rolled out the GST, the RERA Act, Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, and FDI liberalization across sectors. Innovation and rapid advancement in total factor productivity are required in Amrit Kal. Taking cognizance of this fact, for the year FY24, that is, budget allocated 1,200 crore rupees to research and development projects. Further research and development brought forth by a collaboration between academia, the private sector, and government bodies remains key to tapping innovation in the country. Recognizing this, we have set up the Anusandhan Research Fund to seed and promote research across academic institutions, R&D, laboratories, and the academia. Ultimately, the largest stakeholders and beneficiaries of the growth process towards Vikasit Bharat will be the four major castes, namely the Garib or the poor, Mahilaye or the women, Yuva, the youth, and Annadata, the farmer. Accordingly, the budget in Amrit Kal will be devised with these stakeholders in mind. In conclusion, the Indian era is not a phenomenon is not a new phenomenon if we look at the civilizational history of the subcontinent. For 1,000 years, India has created a cultural sphere of philosophy, polity, science, and art which spread across borders, not through conquests, but through its cultural magnificence. During this period, the rest of the world benefited from India's soft power. By 2047, as India crosses the 100-year mark of independence from imperial rule, the Vikasit Bharat will assure prosperity not just to Indians, but to the rest of the world. By becoming central to the vibrant exchange of ideas, technology, and culture. I hope the deliberations in the next few days will be vigorous, stimulating, and fruitful. And I hope that overseas scholars carry pleasant and happy memories when they return home. I wish the conference success and look forward to the deliberations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that far-reaching inaugural address, Finance Minister, encapsulating India's economic strategy, the goals and objectives which we have laid for us. I now turn to the next part, which is a conversation between Professor Bhagwati and myself. Jagdish, if I may ask you, that for a number of years, your father was teaching at the Banaras Hindu University, much before he really did other things in multiple ways. Of course, very closely in the judiciary, where not only on account of your father's connections, but with your brother too. So can you really mention something about the period of that time, if you recall, of Banaras Hindu University and what you saw really and can recollect? Jagdish, like to respond?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Should I?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you want to go ahead?
Yeah. You respond to what I have asked you, Jagdish.
She hasn't asked me
Oh,
anything.
so I am asking you that your father taught
Yeah.
at the Banaras Hindu University and had multiple other connections. Do you recall anything of that period of the Banaras Hindu University when your father taught there?
Yeah, I think he was unusual in judges of the High Court and the Supreme Court in also being interested in education. That's something our family has inherited. And I think he was Vice Chancellor in Bombay University. But at that time, he was also a judge in the Bombay High Court. And so he used to walk over in the evening and go to the registrar and then come home. And when he went to the Supreme Court, then after his retirement there, he was appointed Vice Chancellor of Banaras University. So in that sense, the interest in education is within our family. And that's something we are proud of, in the sense that that is what really matters, because once you have the education, you can do a variety of things. But so if you have a closed mind, there's nothing you can do. And
Okay.
I think this
Thanks.
is really important.
Okay. Jagdish, turning now from your father to you. You studied at Cambridge at a time when you had great luminaries as your contemporaries, A.C. Pigou, you had, of course, Roy Harrod, you had Joan Robinson, you also had Dr. Manmohan Singh when you were studying at Cambridge. Do you recall anything of your period, of that period when you were studying at Cambridge?
Well, I think the Manmohan Singh was almost my classmate. He had actually come to 1 year, he was 1 year ahead of me, but had come 1 year behind me because he came from a very poor family. He was the first one to have actually been sent out and by his vice chancellor. So he came owning quite a bit to the vice chancellor. And I remember that he was particularly, he was a hardy fellow. And in the Cambridge weather, we used to have, take a shower in the early morning and nothing bothered him at all. So I knew this young man was going to go far, but it didn't occur to me that he would become the Prime Minister of the country. So I think he was made of real steel in that sense, but also a lot of charm. So I think that is something which we endeared him to many of us. And I think in the end, one of the things was that as my wife's memoirs showed, she had a problem with dissolving the first marriage. And so she really...
So, yes, Jagdish, bringing you fast forward, Padma, I had your wife subsequently, I had the privilege of being taught by both you and Padma at the Delhi School of Economics, and I remember that with great gratitude. Of course, Padma had many qualities. She was what I call a double B, combining brilliance with beauty. So that was your disability. But do you recall anything of the period when you taught at the Delhi School of Economics and you were not yet married to Padma.
Well, one of the funny things was at the time that I was shall I bring it closer, I think. So I'd gone back to India because Professor Mahalanobis had invited me back. And so I was with the Indian Statistical Institute. But then I wanted to transfer to Delhi School where I would be close to Padma. So I got transferred. And the funny thing was that nobody except a few close friends knew how we were involved with each other. So one funny story is that one day a young woman, and they were all small, young kids, 6, 17, almost immature. And so she comes to me and says, I really would like to ask you a personal question. So I got scared and I said, go and talk to Professor Desai. So she went there and then Padma said, what's the problem? So this girl said, I think Professor Bhagwati is in love with me. Padma said, why do you think so? And he said, he's always smiling at me whenever he's giving his lecture. So after that, I stopped smiling. So there were lots of episodes like that.
Yeah. Jagdish, to many Indian students, for someone like me, in a certain sense, you revolutionized our approach to the teaching of international trade in terms of pedagogy, the kind of new rigor which you really brought to international trade. If I may ask you, Jagdish, that why on earth, first of all, why on earth, considering that your brothers were eminent judges and so on, did you select economics to be the dismal science to be your subject? And within economics, why did you select international trade, considering that India was a completely closed economy at that time? What really attracted you to economics and to international trade?
Well, it was very clear for those of us who were living there at that time to worry about the closeness of the market and of Indian development. One of the funniest things, Finance Minister, was the quality of the system. And there was one joke from the Tariff Commission study was that in an Indian car, everything made a noise except the horn. That was the situation. It's unrecognizable today, thanks to all of you in particular and the Prime Minister. It's completely transformed now. And I see my friend Ann Kruger there. She's equally responsible for what happened. And she played a major role. I'm happy to acknowledge that and so on. So I think today no one would recognize what has happened. It is amazing how things have been totally transformed. And I think Larry Summers once said that the thing about India and the World Bank is, because he was with the World Bank, and he said in the old days, the World Bank used to tell India what to do. Now India tells the World Bank what to do. The thing is completely transformed. So we've really arrived at a new age. And I think all of you need to be complimented for that. We are just beneficiaries of it.
Jagdish, pursuing the same strain, there has been no one who has been a more powerful advocate on the transformative power of trade in fostering economic growth. You wrote that lovely book In Defense of Globalization, partly as a rejoinder to Stiglitz's work, who had written about the globalization and its discontents. In a world which is becoming increasingly so protectionist, do you still hold steadfast to your views, which you propounded in that lovely book, In Defense of Globalization? And how do you think that this changing order and the attitude on the trade, globally speaking, is likely to influence the thinking?
And that lesson is still relevant because in India, despite all the progress we've made, production of cars where horns don't work has disappeared. But there's still some ways to go, Finance Minister. You'd agree. And your work is still cut out for you. So in that sense, we cannot say that we've finally arrived, because it's an ongoing process. It has to be. And I think your beautiful speech brought out the different dimensions on which you could actually, India is engaged. And so it's going to be some years, to say the least. And so you should not retire from politics, Finance Minister. So I think we need to look forward to leadership. And the Prime Minister, actually, I'm very happy. I was actually very smart when the Prime Minister was Chief Minister. And then he got elected. The day he got elected to the Prime Ministership, I had a brainwave. I wrote an article in the Times of India welcoming him. Of course, I had no crystal ball. So I just happened to strike it rich. And so I think that is where, and I think he asked me if I was interested once in being an advisor. And I said no, because my friend V.K. Ramaswamy, whom you must have known, he had told me that when he was advisor in the Ministry of Commerce, Manubhai Shah, who was the Commerce Minister, would call him up in the morning at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning and say, how many coconuts are grown in Kerala? So I told the Prime Minister, I can't answer such questions. You were looking for someone else. So then I suggested my friend there.
Jagdish now...
and I don't know whether he can count the number of coconuts in Kerala, but he seems to have survived. So he must be quite brilliant. So anyway, we've got...
Jagdish, long ago, again taking you...
Panagaria, that's right.
Yeah. Long ago...
referring to Professor Panagaria, who is one of the key people in the team that's transforming India. So I'm really delighted.
Okay, Jagdish, long ago, Padma and you, in the 70s, wrote a lovely book called India, Planning for Industrialization. It has taken us, took a long time after you wrote the book to bring about exactly those kinds of structural ongoing reforms, which has resulting in the kind of outcomes which the Finance Minister mentioned to you. Why do you think that India delayed acting on some of the tenets which were contained in that book of Padma and yours, written in the early 70s? Why was India held back, and why did it take us such an enormously long time to act on something which was so obvious?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that we were held back by the autarkic, inward-looking policies, where even whatever we produced was not of good quality, which could really sustain a rapid transformation. So I think the whole system had to change. And I think that is where we were very lucky to get the Prime Minister to come in. As I said, when he got elected, I was absolutely delighted. Although I could not never advise him on anything. Like, I can't count the number of coconuts in Kerala. But fortunately, Professor Panagaria seems to be able to do that and has survived, made a great issue, a great transformation. But once we get ourselves on the right track, then India is a country of countless numbers of gifted people, and they will come in. They're bound to. But the system has to be moving. So we have to know which bus to board and so on. And I think this is something which the Prime Minister has made very clear from the beginning. And I think he has also been very involved in poverty and in women's issues. I mean, these are two important areas. So once I asked him, because I used to be able to go to him He was very nice. And so once I said, what is so special that you want to convey to the people? And he said, if I want to build a bus stop in a village, then all I need is cement. Right. But he said, I also want to go further and to say that the conductor ought to treat the people who board the bus, who are usually poor, to treat them with respect. Now, I had never heard anybody trained in Cambridge or anywhere else talk like that. I mean, to me, it was a huge surprise that anybody could think like that. And that endeared me to him. And he was also very good about women. My wife was absolutely keen to vote for him for one simple reason, because I had gone to see him when he was chief minister and about to become the prime minister. And we Gujaratis, you probably know, when we crack a joke, we put our hand out. And then the other party is supposed to go like that. So you are actually, it's a very Gujarati thing. So Padma said to me when I went in before my lecture, and he says, I've heard your jokes, I don't want to go. And so she was sitting out in the audience. And then Narendra Bhai came out, and he remembered. I mean, that's the amazing thing about him. Someone must have told him that Padma was in the audience. So he comes around and says, Bahan, that's the Gujarati Bahan, agar aao. And he got her to stay with him. And for Padma, he had the Prime Minister's vote for life. And I have such stories from all the women he's encountered. So for him, women's issues were important. And I could write a whole book on the subject, because there's lots of things he has done, and which I'm aware of. But that is for another session.
So finally, Jagdish, last question, while wishing you all the best in the coming years for your continued creativity, let me just ask you that since the theme of this conclave is the Indian era, the Finance Minister has outlined very coherently the ingredients of what could constitute the Indian era. What would be your advice to this audience, to the government, to the Prime Minister, and to the Finance Minister in what they can do by way of policy and other changes to accelerate that process of the realization of the Indian era? Any last words from you, Jagdish?
After hearing the Finance Minister's extensive survey, it would be presumptuous for me to suggest that she left out something, because she did not. I think we are on an onward track. There is nothing which bothers me at the moment as I look at what's going on. And it seems to me that to try and advise this government is very difficult, because most of the things being done are really very good and proper. So it seems to me that, and a lot of young people are coming up. There's a great deal of enthusiasm in the country also. And I think I never thought I would see this in my lifetime. And so it seems to me that this is something, I'm glad I'm about almost 91, and that I've lived long enough to see the transformation and feel good about it.
Thank you very much, Jagdish. I'm sure that we all wish to wish you all the very best. Well, friends, that brings us to the close of this inaugural session. The Finance Minister has shared her vision. We've had a very interesting conversation with Professor Bhagwati, when he has ended up finally by saying that notwithstanding his age, we are on the right track for realizing the objectives which we have in mind. Thank you very much.